Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a place that almost everyone has passed through, at least in memory. The hallways are long and linoleum floored. The lockers are painted a colour somewhere between green and grey. Someone is bouncing a basketball down the corridor, and the echo of it carries all the way to the front office, where a secretary is typing without looking up. You can smell chalk dust and cafeteria rolls, and something faintly chemical from the science wing. And outside, through these tall, rectangular windows, the sky is the particular blue of an October morning that has not decided yet whether it wants to be warm or cold. Before we drift any further, I want to say a genuine, heartfelt thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You sent in something I'd been quietly turning over in my mind for a while, and seeing it in the comments felt like someone else finishing your sentence. This channel only grows because of ideas like yours, and I do not take that lightly. If you are enjoying what we do here, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and if you feel like it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I love knowing whether it is midnight in Ohio or a slow Sunday afternoon somewhere with rain on the window, and if you prefer to listen on the go, we're now on Spotify as well. The link is in the description, quiet and waiting for you. Now, dim the lights if you can, put on a fan, or open a window, just enough to let in a little air. Settle in, get comfortable, the kind of comfortable where you're not planning to move for a while. Because tonight I want to ask you some questions, not trick questions, just the kind that make you slow down and actually wonder. What did it feel like to walk into a 1960s American high school on a Monday morning, knowing you had nowhere else to be? What did the gymnasium smell like on a Friday night when the bleachers were full? What did it sound like when the bell rang and several hundred teenagers moved at once through corridors too narrow for the purpose? What did a homeroom teacher look like when she was trying to hold the class together and also, quietly, hold herself together? What did it mean to be 16 years old in 1963, with the whole country shifting around you and no one quite able to explain what was happening or where it was all going? What was it like to grow up in a school that felt, in certain important ways, like the whole world? Take a breath, because just like that it is 1962. The flag is out front. The principal has already made his morning announcements over the intercom, and his voice has crackled and faded the way it always does. Someone has taped a poster to the gymnasium door. First period starts in 4 minutes, and you are here, right on time. There is something about the smell of a 1960s high school that no architect ever planned for and no janitor could fully eliminate. A deep layered scent that belonged entirely to that building and no other place on earth. You notice it the moment you pull open the heavy front door, a combination of floor wax and chalk dust, and the particular mustiness of paper that has been stacked in warm rooms since September. Underneath all of it, the faint ghost of yesterday's cafeteria lunch, something with ground beef and tomato sauce that has soaked into the walls so thoroughly it has become part of the building's personality. You stand just inside the entrance for a moment, letting the door close behind you, and you breathe it in without meaning to. It is not a pleasant smell, not exactly, not the kind of smell you would choose or describe fondly in the moment, but it is specific. It is this place and no other, and that specificity is its own kind of comfort, the smell of routine, of something that will be the same today as it was yesterday and the day before. The floors have been waxed since you left on Friday. You can tell because the linoleum has that particular glassy quality it only has on Monday mornings, before the traffic of several hundred pairs of shoes has dulled it back to its ordinary state. The custodian arrived before anyone in the dark and applied the wax with a machine that hums along the corridor in long, slow passes and left behind this shine and this smell, a sharp chemical sweetness underneath everything else. Clean in the institutional way of things that are cleaned on a schedule rather than when they need it. You walk toward your locker and the smell changes slightly with each section of the building. Near the science wing it picks up something acrid and mineral, the residue of experiments conducted the week before, sulphur perhaps, or the particular sharpness of the chemicals kept in brown glass bottles on the back shelf of the lab. Near the gymnasium it becomes more physical, more animal, a warmth that the ventilation system manages but never quite clears. Near the cafeteria it is all industrial grease and the memory of bread rolls, a smell so deeply embedded in the building that it persists even at 7:45 in the morning, long before the kitchen has begun its work for the day. The heating system contributes its own layer. The radiators in a 1960s school building run hot and loud, and when they are working at full capacity on a cold October morning, they fill the hallway with a dry warmth that has a smell of its own, metal and dust and the particular dryness of air that has been heated from the inside. You can feel it in the back of your throat after a few minutes, a faint dryness that has you reaching for the water fountain before the first period has even begun. Other smells arrive with the students, hair cream and the light floral of a mother's perfume still clinging to a coat, the clean cotton smell of a fresh shirt, rubber soles on waxed floors, the waxy crayon smell of fresh notebook paper being opened for the first time. These human smells layer themselves over the building's own, and by 9 o'clock the hallway smells less like a cleaned and empty institution, and more like the living thing it becomes during the hours it is occupied. There is a particular quality to the smell of chalk that is worth its own moment. The blackboards in every classroom are wiped but not washed, and the chalk dust that has settled into the tray at the bottom and into the grooves of the board itself and into the air around the front of the room carries a powdery dryness that coats the back of the throat in a way that feels almost educational, as if the act of breathing in a classroom is itself a form of instruction. Teachers write on these boards for 6 hours a day. The chalk wears down to small stubs. The erasers accumulate a thick grey coating that has to be beaten out against the outside wall at the end of the week, sending small clouds of dust into the October air. You will not remember any of this deliberately. That is not how it works. You will not stand in the hallway and think, I am memorising this. You will simply move through the building the way you do every morning, carrying your books, thinking about the test in third period or the conversation you had on the telephone last night, and the smell will settle into you without your permission. Decades later, something will bring it back. A particular combination of floor cleaner and warm air. A school visited for a different reason entirely. A building that simply smells in some accidental way, like that one. And when it returns, it will not return as information. It will return a sensation, complete and immediate, the way smell always does, bypassing the part of the mind that thinks and going directly to the part that simply knows. And for a moment, with no warning and no explanation, you will be 14 years old again. The bell has not rung yet. The day has not started. You're standing just inside the front door, and the whole week is still ahead of you, and the building smells exactly like it always did. That is the gift and the weight of a place like this. It does not ask permission to stay with you. It simply does. Homeroom is not quite a class and not quite nothing. It exists in a category of its own, a brief, compulsory gathering that happens every morning before the real day begins, and the teacher who presides over it occupies a peculiar role, part authority figure, part administrator, part reluctant shepherd of whoever the alphabet happened to assign her. You file in along with 28 other students, whose last names begin with the same letters as yours, which is the closest thing to community planning that high school ever attempted, and you take the same seat you've taken every morning since September, because in a 1960s classroom, seats are not assigned so much as they are simply understood. The teacher calls the roll from the same sheet she's been working from since the first week of school. moving through the names in a voice that is neither warm nor cold, simply present, the voice of someone performing a necessary function with professional steadiness. Each name gets a moment. Each response of here or present gets a small mark in the ledger. The whole process takes approximately 4 minutes and accomplishes, from an administrative standpoint, exactly what it is meant to accomplish. But it accomplishes something else as well, something less official. It establishes that the day has begun, that everyone is accounted for, that the machinery of the school has started its work. There are announcements. They come from 2 sources, the teacher herself and the intercom mounted on the wall near the door, which crackles to life at the same time every morning, with the voice of the principal or his secretary delivering information about the day. Pep rally this afternoon. Senior class photographs have been rescheduled. The cafeteria will be serving the hot lunch option on Thursday. These are not urgent matters. They are the small administrative weather of the school day. Information that most students absorb without fully registering, the way you absorb the temperature outside or the particular quality of the morning light. The room has a stillness during homeroom that it will not have again until after everyone leaves. Students are present but not yet engaged, suspended in the brief interval between the world outside and the demands of first period. Someone reads. Someone copies something from a notebook. Someone stares at the window in the concentrated, vacant way of a person whose mind is elsewhere and does not particularly want to be recalled. The teacher moves between her desk and the board with small, purposeful movements, distributing papers that were collected the day before, making a notation, consulting the ledger again. She's not performing, she's simply working, and there is a kind of comfort in watching someone work without theatrics. The homeroom period is 15 minutes long. In that time, nothing of obvious consequence occurs. No knowledge is formally transmitted. No skill is practiced. And yet the rhythm of it, the roll call, the announcements, the particular quality of the room just before the first bell, becomes one of the most durable textures of the school day, something you carry without knowing you are carrying it. Years later, if you try to remember what high school felt like as a daily experience, homeroom is often what you return to first. Not the lessons, not the tests. This room, these 15 minutes, this particular version of the morning before the morning truly began. The bell rings, chairs scrape. The room empties in a rush that is efficient without being hurried, each student moving toward the door with the muscle memory of someone who has done this particular sequence of motions enough times that it requires no thought. The teacher remains at her desk. She will sit there for 1 minute, maybe 2, completing the attendance record, before she gathers her own things and moves toward whatever the rest of her day requires. The room is empty now, all 29 chairs pushed back at slightly different angles, all 29 desks holding the faint warmth of the bodies that occupied them. The linoleum still carries the mark of morning foot traffic. On the board, the date has been written in the upper right corner in the teacher's careful hand, and it will remain there until tomorrow, when she erases it and writes the next one. It is 8:03 in the morning. The day has officially begun. Somewhere down the corridor, first period is assembling itself. Chairs pulling in, notebooks opening, the low murmur of students arranging themselves for the next hour. The building is fully occupied now, every room in use, the whole institution running at the pace it was built for, quiet and purposeful and continuous, the way a school is supposed to run when everything is working as it should. You will not appreciate any of this for years. That is also how it works. For 45 minutes at a stretch, the hallway is the quietest place in the building, a long corridor with a low ceiling and institutional lighting that hums faintly at a frequency only the very attentive can hear. Then the bell rings, and in approximately 4 seconds the whole nature of the space transforms. Locker doors bang open with a sound like a row of small explosions. Voices rise all at once from every classroom, a wave of conversation that has been held in check for nearly an hour, and now spills out into the corridor with the enthusiasm of something finally released. Sneakers squeak on waxed linoleum. Someone laughs too loudly at something. Someone else calls a name from 20 feet away and does not wait for an answer. The hallway fills completely. Bodies and voices and the particular physical energy of several hundred young people in motion, and then, in less time than it took to empty, it empties again. This 5-minute interval between classes is one of the most compressed social experiences the school day contains. Everything that cannot be said inside a classroom happens here, in passing, in fragments, in the 30 seconds between one room and the next. A conversation begun at a locker continues in motion down the corridor and ends mid-sentence at the door of the next class. A note is passed hand to hand with the efficiency of something that has been rehearsed. 2 people make eye contact from opposite sides of the hallway and communicate something complete without stopping, without speaking, and move on. The locker is a fixed point in the geography of the hallway, and what happens at the locker in those 5 minutes is its own small world. You spin the combination with the automatic confidence of someone who's done it 1,000 times, feeling the clicks through your fingers, and the door swings open to reveal the interior you have organised and reorganised since September. Books stacked in a particular order, a small mirror on the inside of the door, perhaps a photograph or 2. The accumulation of small personal decisions in a space that is entirely yours, within a building that belongs to everyone. You take what you need, you close the door, the combination spins back to 0. Teachers move through the hallway during passing periods too, and their presence has a particular effect on the noise and motion around them. A slight adjustment, a degree of self-consciousness that students would deny feeling but clearly do. The teachers walk with the specific authority of people who know where they are going and do not need to navigate the social geometry of the space the way students do. They move through it, rather than within it. They nod at each other across the corridor in the brief acknowledgement of colleagues between obligations. There are students who use the passing period as an opportunity to be seen, who move through the hallway with a particular deliberateness that has nothing to do with getting from one class to the next. The hallway is the most public space in the building during these 5 minutes, more public than the cafeteria at lunch, more public than the gymnasium, because everyone passes through it, and the student who understands this and moves accordingly is practicing a social skill that no class in the building will ever formally teach. How you carry yourself in the hallway tells people something. Most students understand this by October of 9th grade without ever having it explained to them. The sound of the hallway diminishes in 2 stages. First, the volume drops as students peel off into their classrooms, and then 30 seconds before the bell it drops again as the last few stragglers speed up. Books clutched against their chests, and the corridor resolves back into its ordinary weekday quiet. What remains is a few loose pieces of paper on the floor, a sneaker print in something wet near the water fountain, the faint residual energy of several hundred people who are here and are now somewhere else, sitting down, opening their notebooks, waiting for the teacher to begin. The bell rings. The hallway empties to its working quiet. And for another 45 minutes, the corridor belongs to itself again, long and still and faintly lit. The hum of the overhead lights the only sound in it, the waxed floor carrying the afternoon light in long, even planes that reach almost to the far wall before they disappear. In 5 years, you will not be able to say exactly what those hallways looked like, but you will remember the sound of them, the way the bell released everything at once, the way 5 minutes contained an entire compressed version of the social world you were living in. You will remember what it felt like to move through a crowd of people you knew, half knowing and half known, neither alone nor fully accompanied. That particular feeling does not have another name. The hallway is its only address. You take your seat at a desk that is bolted to a chair in a single piece of furniture that feels like it was designed to prevent anyone from ever truly getting comfortable, a constraint that may have been intentional. The desk surface is laminate, the colour of old mustard, and it bears the accumulated history of everyone who sat here before you, initials scratched in the corner, ink marks that were never quite erased, a groove near the top where generations of students rested their pencils and let them roll. The walls are painted a shade of green that no one would ever choose for their home, a colour that belongs exclusively to institutions somewhere between sage and sea foam, slightly too bright in the overhead light and slightly too dull everywhere else. The rows are straight. This is not a matter of preference or arrangement. The desks are in rows because rows are the appropriate configuration for a room in which information is transmitted from the front to the back, from one person to many, from authority to attention. The logic of it is so deeply built into the architecture of the classroom that you would not think to question it, any more than you would question the direction the chairs face in a movie theatre. This is how classrooms work. This is what they look like. The arrangement makes a particular kind of relationship visible and permanent. At the front of the room, centred, is the blackboard. It spans most of the wall, its dark surface marked with the ghost traces of everything written on it over years. Chalk residue that has settled permanently into the grain of the board so that even when clean, it is not quite clean. Faint outlines of previous lessons visible in certain lights, like a palimpsest of instruction. The chalk tray at the bottom holds 3 or 4 pieces in various stages of use, and one eraser that leaves a pale grey smear when applied, and a cloud of fine white dust that drifts toward the first row and settles on everything. The teacher's desk is positioned to the side, not behind, but near enough to the front, that the authority it represents is always present in the room, even when the teacher is standing at the board with her back to the class. The windows run along one wall, tall and rectangular, the kind that open from the bottom by cranking a metal handle, and the light that comes through them is the best thing about the room. On a clear October morning it arrives at an angle, laying long rectangles of sun across the floor and the first 2 rows of desks, and the students who sit in those rows shift in their chairs to avoid it, or turn into it depending on their disposition. The glass in the windows is old enough that it has a slight waviness, a barely perceptible distortion that makes the view outside look like something seen through water. You spend a certain number of hours in this room looking out those windows without consciously deciding to. The bulletin board on the side wall holds a combination of official material and the teacher's own additions, a calendar, a map of the world with coloured pins in it, a few student papers selected from the last assignment and mounted with tacks, their authors distinguished by having been deemed exemplary, in some way the class accepted without resentment. There may be a poster, educational but not condescending, a timeline of American history or a diagram of the periodic table, mounted with more care than the other items, suggesting it arrived from somewhere official rather than being assembled in the room. The smell is chalk and warm air, and the particular dry closeness of a room that holds the same bodies at the same time every day. The sound is the teacher's voice, and the scratch of pencils and the occasional cough, and the distant muffled sound of the class in the next room, present as a faint murmur through the painted cinder block wall. You will sit in this room, or one nearly identical to it, for thousands of hours over the course of 4 years. You will sit here in September when the windows are open and the sound of the athletic fields drifts in, and in February when the radiators knock against the silence and the windows are locked against cold. You will sit here bored and attentive and anxious and entirely elsewhere in your mind, and the room will look the same in each of those states, indifferent to your interior weather, reliable in its arrangement, asking nothing of you except that you face the front and be present. Decades later, if someone describes a classroom to you, this is the one you will see, not any classroom you have visited since. This one, with its mustard-coloured desks and its institutional green and its blackboard full of ghost lessons. The room that was the same for everyone. The room everyone who went to school in this decade carried out with them without meaning to. A shared interior that belongs to no particular person and somehow to all of them. Your English teacher arrives 30 seconds before the bell and sets her things on the desk with the brisk efficiency of a person who has done this particular sequence of motions so many times it has become automatic. Gradebook, chalk, one dog-eared copy of the text, a coffee cup she will not drink from until after the third row has stopped talking. She is not unkind. She is not the kind of teacher who leans against the desk and tries to seem young. She stands at the front because the front is where teachers stand. And she speaks in the measured, unhurried voice of someone who has decided that 32 teenagers are entirely capable of paying attention if the expectation is held firmly enough. There is a difference in 1962 between a teacher you fear and a teacher you respect, and the best ones manage to be both without ever raising their voice. She expects you to have done the reading. This is not a negotiable point. She does not begin class by asking who has finished the assignment and then modulating her disappointment based on the response. She begins class by discussing the reading, and if you have not done it, that fact becomes apparent within the first few minutes in a way that is more uncomfortable than being called out directly would be. The room simply moves forward without you, and you sit in it, present but unequipped, and that is its own instruction. The expectations in a 1960s classroom are not primarily academic, or not only academic. They are behavioural and physical, and include a set of assumptions about attention and posture, and the direction of your eyes that would feel, to a later generation, like an unusual level of control over the body. You sit up, you face the front, you do not speak while the teacher is speaking. When you have something to contribute, you raise your hand and you wait. And when you are called upon, you stand to give your answer in some classrooms, remaining in your chair in others, but either way you deliver your response at a volume the whole room can hear. The performance of learning is part of the learning. Some teachers are severe, not cruel but severe, with a precision about language and expectation that makes the classroom feel like a place governed by laws rather than preferences. Your history teacher speaks in complete sentences when he is angry, which is a more effective deterrent than shouting would be. Your mathematics teacher erases incorrect work from the board without comment, which communicates more clearly than correction could. These are people who came of age in a different era, who were themselves taught by people who came of age in a different era still, and who carry forward certain standards with the conviction of someone who has never seriously considered that they might not be universal. Other teachers are warmer, more individual, more visibly invested in the particular students in front of them. Your literature teacher remembers what you said 2 weeks ago in discussion and refers back to it today, connecting the threads of a conversation that has been running across months. She writes comments in the margins of your papers that are not corrections but responses, as if she is a reader rather than an evaluator, as if your sentences were worth engaging with on their own terms. These teachers are not less rigorous, they are differently rigorous, interested in the quality of your thinking rather than the correctness of your performance. What all of them share is a belief in the seriousness of what they are doing. Teaching in this era is not a career that apologises for itself. It is not a profession that spends time explaining its own value or competing for the attention of students who might otherwise be engaged elsewhere. It proceeds from the assumption that what happens in this room matters, that the texts being studied and the skills being practiced are worth the sustained attention of everyone present, and that the teacher's role is to hold that assumption in place firmly enough that the students, whatever their private reservations, behave as though they share it. You will not agree with all of them. You will find some of them boring, some of them frightening, some of them so deeply committed to their subject that the subject itself becomes interesting simply by proximity to their interest. You'll carry one or two of them forward with you for the rest of your life in the specific way that a very few teachers get carried, not as memories exactly, but as voices, presences, a way of thinking about a problem or approaching a page that belonged first to them and became, through years of use, your own. That is what the best of them were trying to give you, not the content of any particular lesson, something harder to name and more durable than that. The cafeteria is a large room with low ceilings and long tables of laminate and metal, and it is the only place in the entire building where no one is pretending that the social order does not exist. Elsewhere in the school, in classrooms and hallways, and the relative neutrality of homeroom, you can almost convince yourself that everyone is more or less the same, that proximity and shared experience smooth over the distinctions. But the cafeteria is the place where the architecture reveals itself, where the athletes cluster near the windows and the student council members occupy the same 4 seats they occupied last year, and the year before that, and where you learn, within your first week of high school, that the geography of where you sit is a piece of information about yourself that you will carry longer than you expect. The line forms at 11:45, and the process of moving through it has its own daily rhythm. Trays are lifted from a stack at the entrance, warm from the dishwasher and slightly damp. The food is served by cafeteria workers in white uniforms and hairnets, who move with the practiced efficiency of people managing a high-volume operation under constant mild pressure. The options are limited and rotation-based: macaroni and cheese on Wednesdays, hot dogs on Fridays, something with ground beef and a sauce whose name differs by school, but whose character is universal on Tuesdays. The milk comes in small waxed cartons, white or chocolate, and the cartons are cold enough that they sweat in your hand. The smell of the cafeteria is one of the building's dominant sensory facts, warm and dense and institutional, a combination of cooked starch and industrial cleaning product, and the particular humid warmth of a room where a great deal of food is being prepared and consumed simultaneously. It is not an unpleasant smell in any absolute sense. It is simply very specific. The smell of communal feeding on a schedule. The smell of the same meal prepared for 400 people. The smell of a room that has been doing this work for decades and carries the evidence of it in every surface. You carry your tray to a table, and the choice of where to sit is not as casual as it appears. You made this choice at the beginning of the year, or the choice was made for you by the circumstances of who you knew and who you sat with on the first day, and it has calcified since then into something that feels like preference, but functions more like territory. The table you sit at is your table, not officially, not in any way that would be written down or enforced, but the understanding is as real as any formal rule in the building, and the cost of violating it, of sitting somewhere you're not expected, is a social consequence that most students find it easier to avoid than to test. Conversation at the table during lunch is the most relaxed conversation of the school day, the one that bears the least direct relationship to anything academic or institutional. Teachers assigned to cafeteria duty patrol the perimeter with the particular expression of people performing a task that is necessary but not interesting, alert to real disruption while deliberately not noticing the ordinary low-level chaos around them. A chair scrapes. A tray is dropped somewhere with a crash that produces a brief instinctive cheer from the nearby tables and then is forgotten in seconds. The 25 minutes ends and the room empties with the same compressed efficiency as the hallway between classes. Trays are returned. The cafeteria workers begin the work of resetting for the next period. The long tables stand empty and slightly sticky, the overhead lights reflecting in the linoleum in uneven patches. What was, for a short while, the social centre of the building is now just a room again, waiting for tomorrow, patient and indifferent, already carrying in its walls and its floors the accumulated weight of every lunch period it has ever held. There is no dress code that tells you to look a certain way, not exactly, but there is something that functions like one, an agreement held in place not by rules, but by observation, by the quiet social pressure of 5 days a week spent in the same building with the same people who will remember what you wore on Tuesday. For girls, the skirt falls below the knee, sometimes well below it, and the blouse is tucked, and the shoes are flat or have a low heel that does not click too loudly on linoleum. For boys, the trousers are pressed, or meant to be, and the shirt is collared, and the hair, above everything else, the hair must be right, combed into a shape that communicates effort without communicating too much effort. To get this wrong is not a disaster, but to get it right, consistently, and without appearing to try, is to understand something about how the world works that no class in the building will ever teach you directly. The clothes themselves come from a limited number of sources: a department store downtown, the same one most families use, the one where the women's section smells of perfume samples and the men's section smells of wool, and where the school clothes are bought at the end of August in an annual ritual that combines the practical and the aspirational. A hand-me-down from an older sibling, slightly worn at the collar, adjusted at the hem, carrying the faint evidence of the body it fit before it fit yours. Homemade in some cases, cut from a pattern and sewn by a mother who learned from her mother, and who can produce a skirt that is indistinguishable from a store-bought one if the fabric is right. You learn early that clothing communicates things you're not consciously trying to say. The quality of the fabric, the condition of the hem, whether the shoes have been polished recently. These are not things that anyone comments on directly, not usually, but they are read by everyone all the same, processed and filed away in the ongoing social accounting that adolescence conducts constantly and never quite stops conducting. To wear something slightly wrong for the context, not wrong in any absolute sense, but wrong for this school, this hallway, this table in the cafeteria, is to feel it without being told. The changes come gradually through the decade. By 63 and 64, something has loosened slightly, not in the formal requirements of dress, but in the texture of them, a small widening of what is acceptable, a slight easing of the strictest interpretations. Skirt lengths begin to travel upward by degrees measured in inches that feel, in the moment, enormous. Hair for boys starts to carry, in some cases, a new kind of length and a new kind of intention. These are small changes, incremental, barely visible from week to week, but they accumulate, and by the middle of the decade they will have added up to something unmistakable. For now, though, in the early years of the decade, the clothes carry the values of the era they belong to. Neatness is a form of respect, both for oneself and for the institution. The way you present yourself at school is understood to reflect not only on you, but on your family, on your household, on the way you were raised. To appear dishevelled is to make a statement whether you intended one or not. The school day begins with a look in the bathroom mirror, a final check of the collar and the part in the hair, and the knowledge that you will be looked at for the next 8 hours by people who notice things without saying so. There are students who wear the same things consistently, who have a small and reliable rotation of outfit that never aspire to fashion and never fall into carelessness, and who move through the social world of the school without calling attention to themselves in either direction. This is its own kind of skill. And then there are the students who understand clothing as a language, who make choices that are legible to everyone in the building as choices, who use what they wear to say something about who they are or who they intend to become. These students are watched more closely. They are talked about more. The territory they inhabit is higher in visibility and higher in risk. Most students are somewhere in between, wanting to be seen but not too seen, wanting to fit without disappearing entirely, navigating a set of unwritten specifications that shift with each passing month, and that no one has ever written down, and that everyone knows by heart. There is a kind of honesty that physical education demands that no other class does. In the gymnasium, stripped of the buffer of notebooks and the armour of desk and chair, you're simply a body, and the question of what that body can do is answered in front of everyone at once. The gym teacher blows a whistle with an authority that carries through two walls, and the class lines up, not quite military but close. A row of teenagers in matching shorts and white t-shirts, stamped with the school's name in faded block letters. A uniform that manages to be both practical and faintly humiliating. The ropes hang from the ceiling, thick and knotted at intervals, and the climbing of them is a public performance that no one who was not athletic has ever entirely forgotten. The gymnasium smells of rubber and sweat and the particular warmth of a room that has been holding physical effort inside it for years. A warmth that settles into the wooden floor and the painted cinder block walls and the mats stacked along the far side, and does not entirely leave between periods. The floor is hardwood, a light blonde that has been varnished enough times that it has a faint amber quality in the overhead light, and the painted lines of the basketball court run across it, in colours that have been refreshed enough times to be sharp and clear, but that show, if you look closely, the ghost lines of previous configurations beneath them. The gym teacher occupies a specific position in the social ecology of the school that is different from any other teacher. The subject they teach requires a different relationship to their body, to failure, to the public display of effort and its absence. A bookshelf along the wall holding volumes that appear to have been selected for their spines rather than their contents. A window that looks out onto the front entrance, which means the principal can see who arrives in the morning and when. A surveillance that everyone in the building is aware of and that costs him nothing to exercise. On the wall behind him, a framed copy of the school's mission statement in a typeface that suggests permanence. His secretary sits outside the frosted glass door in an anteroom that functions as a buffer between the principal and the rest of the building. She knows everything that happens in the school, not from surveillance but from proximity, from the information that flows past her desk in the course of a normal day, phone calls and visitors and disciplinary referrals and the ongoing ordinary communication of an institution managing several hundred people simultaneously. She's not unkind, but she's not warm, and the combination of competence and neutrality she projects is its own form of institutional authority. You do not know her first name. It has never occurred to you to wonder. The principal appears in the hallway occasionally, moving through the building with the measured pace of someone conducting a survey. He nods at teachers. He pauses at doorways and looks into classrooms without disrupting them. He speaks to students when he speaks to them at all, in a tone that is neither friendly nor adversarial, simply direct. The tone of someone who occupies a position that does not require the social negotiations most relationships in the building demand. Students straighten slightly when he passes. The straightening is not conscious. It is simply what the body does. Discipline in this building runs through his office in the final instance, and while most students will never arrive there for that reason, the knowledge of it is present in the background of every school day, a gravitational force whose effects are felt even when it is not invoked. The teacher's authority is real and daily. The principal's authority is more occasional, more absolute, the authority of last resort rather than first line. It does not need to be demonstrated frequently to be understood completely. By the end of the decade, the relationship between students and institutional authority will begin to shift, and the unquestioned weight of the office will start to carry, for some students, a different quality, more contested, more visible as a construction rather than a natural fact. But for now, in the first years of the 1960s, that moment has not arrived. The name on the frosted glass still means what it has always meant. The office at the end of the corridor still holds the particular gravity of unchallenged authority. And the students who pass that door on their way to class still feel, in some wordless way, exactly what they are meant to feel. Small, in the best possible sense. Part of something larger than themselves, held inside a structure built to contain and direct, and ultimately release them into the world that waits past the front entrance. That is the weight of the office. And for most students, in most years, it is not a burden at all. The school library is the quietest room in the building, and the quiet there is a different quality of quiet from the quiet of an empty classroom, more intentional, more weighted, the silence of a place that exists specifically to hold it. The librarian moves between the shelves with the particular economy of motion that comes from knowing exactly where everything is, returning books to their places with small, precise movements, adjusting a chair, straightening a row, all without making a sound. The card catalogue stands near the door, a long wooden cabinet with dozens of small drawers, each one filled with typed index cards that record the holdings of the collection in a system that rewards patience and penalizes haste. You pull a drawer open and it slides smoothly, and the smell that rises from it is the smell of paper and time. The library serves several different populations simultaneously and with apparent ease. There are the students who've been sent here by a teacher with a specific research assignment, a list of topics and a due date, who approach the card catalogue with the focused urgency of people with a task. There are the students who have a study period and have chosen to spend it here rather than the study hall because the library's quiet is a different quality of quiet, more forgiving, less supervised. And there are the students who come because they want to, which in a 1960s high school is a smaller population than the library deserves, but a real one. Students who have discovered that the shelves contain things the curriculum does not, that the library is the one room in the building where you can follow a question wherever it leads without anyone redirecting you back to the assigned text. The shelves themselves are made of dark wood, heavy and substantial, the kind of shelving that was built to hold more weight than books and has. They run in parallel rows from the front of the room toward the back, and the farther back you go, the less traffic the shelves see, and the more likely you are to find books that have not been checked out in years, their spines slightly faded, their pages yellowed at the edges in the way of paper that has been sitting in a warm room for a long time. These are the books the library holds not because anyone has recently asked for them, but because a library is a place that keeps things, that maintains a relationship with information even after its immediate usefulness has passed. The reading tables near the windows are where most students sit, and the afternoon light that falls across them in October has a particular quality, low and golden and slightly amber, the kind of light that makes whatever you are reading feel more serious and more pleasurable at the same time. Students sit with their elbows on the tables and their heads bent over books or notebooks, and the silence around them is the shared, cooperative silence of people who have agreed without speaking that this room requires a different kind of presence from the rest of the building. You drop your voice before you've decided to. You set your bag down carefully. The room asks something of you, and you give it automatically. The librarian is, in most schools in this era, a woman of middle age with a precise relationship to the collection, and an unofficial but real relationship to the students who use it regularly. She remembers what you have checked out before. She makes suggestions without being asked that are often exactly right, drawing a connection between something you mentioned in passing last week and something on the shelf she has been meaning to show you. She does not talk about books the way a teacher does, as text to be analysed and assessed. She talks about them the way a reader does, as experiences, as things that happened to her when she encountered them, and the distinction is significant enough that students who are otherwise indifferent to assigned reading sometimes find themselves, in this room, genuinely interested in something for the first time. The checkout process is manual and ceremonial. You bring your selection to the desk. The librarian opens the back cover and removes the small card from the pocket pasted there, a card that records every previous borrower in a column of stamped dates and handwritten names. She stamps the due date with the date stamp, makes a notation, and slides the card into a wooden box behind the desk. The book is yours for 2 weeks. The names of everyone who borrowed it before you remain inside the cover. A small history of the book's life in the collection. Read as you will never know who held this same object, and read these same pages in this same room. You carry it home in your bag and it sits on your nightstand and you read it by lamplight after dinner, and the quiet of the library follows you there in some form, a residue of the room's particular atmosphere that makes the reading feel different from reading assigned material, more voluntary, more your own. That is what the library gave you in the end. Not only the books, the experience of choosing freely. In a quiet room full of things worth knowing, the understanding that a building could contain, alongside all its requirements and schedules and institutional purposes, a space that belonged entirely to your own curiosity. That room is harder to find now. But it existed then, at the end of the corridor, past the science wing, past the trophy case, past the principal's door. It was there every day, and its quiet was waiting, and the card catalogue was full, and the librarian knew where everything was. All you had to do was go in. Somewhere in the middle of 10th or 11th grade, you're called in to speak with the guidance counsellor, a conversation that has been scheduled by someone else, and that you arrive at with no particular preparation and a vague sense that something important is about to be decided. The guidance counsellor's office is small and has a plant in it that is doing its best. There are pamphlets arranged on a shelf, colleges and technical programs and military service branches, and the counsellor sits across from you at a desk that is neither large enough to feel powerful nor small enough to feel friendly. The question, when it comes, is simple. What are you planning to do after graduation? And the simplicity of the question is somehow the hardest thing about it. You have been thinking about this question in the way that most teenagers think about it, which is to say incompletely, in fragments, in the unconnected way that the future presents itself when it is still far enough away to seem theoretical. You have ideas. They are not organised. They exist in separate compartments that have not yet been asked to relate to one another. A subject you're good at, a thing you have imagined yourself doing, a place you have thought about going. None of it assembled into anything that resembles a plan. The guidance counsellor's question asks you to assemble it now across a desk in a room with a plant that is doing its best, and the result is a version of yourself that feels slightly improvised. The counsellor listens with the professional patience of someone who has heard every possible answer to this question and found a way to receive each one without revealing a preference. If you say college, she nods and reaches for the appropriate pamphlets. If you say you're not sure, she nods in a slightly different way and asks some follow-up questions that are designed to help you locate your own intentions, questions about what subjects you find least difficult, what you imagine doing on a Tuesday morning 10 years from now, whether you have spoken to your parents about any of this. The questions are gentle and also subtly directive, because the counsellor has been given a role in this institution that is not purely supportive. She's also sorting, placing students on tracks, not cruelly, not without care, but placing them nonetheless. The pamphlets on her shelf are not all equal. The college pamphlets are placed at eye level, their covers showing young people on lawns in front of brick buildings, looking purposeful and unhurried. The technical school pamphlets are slightly lower, their covers showing people in work clothes operating machinery with expressions of competent satisfaction. The military materials are in a separate section, crisp and official, where you reach, and which ones you carry out, and which ones the counsellor slides across the desk toward you rather than waiting for you to ask. These small gestures contain information that you may not process until much later, if you process them at all. What the counsellor cannot fully account for is the gap between what a 17-year-old can articulate about themselves and what they actually are. You're more than your grades and your aptitude scores and your parents' occupation, more than the particular combination of subjects in which you have performed well and poorly, more than the version of yourself that shows up in this small office with its struggling plant and its ranked pamphlets. But the system the counsellor operates within does not have a category for what you might become, given time and chance and the right circumstance. It has categories for what you appear to be right now, assessed against a set of expectations that were assembled by people who are not in this room and who will not know your name. You leave the office carrying 1 or 2 pamphlets and a form that needs to be taken home and signed. The conversation has lasted 20 minutes. You walk back into the hallway and the normal noise of the school day resumes around you. And the question that was just posed to you, the simple, enormous question of what you are planning to do, settles somewhere in the middle distance of your thinking, not answered but activated, not resolved but present in a new way. Some students will make exactly the decision the pamphlets pointed toward and find it right. They will go where the system directed them and discover that it knew something true about them, that the track they were placed on led somewhere worth going. Others will spend years walking a path that was chosen in a 20-minute conversation in a small office and wonder at some point how much of themselves they left in that room without knowing it. The guidance counsellor will not remember you specifically. She will see 40 or 50 students this semester alone, and will do her best by each of them within the limits of her time and her tools and the institution she serves. She is not the villain of this story. She's a person doing a real job that carries more consequence than its modest furnishings suggest. The plant on the windowsill is still there when you leave. You notice it on the way out in a way you did not on the way in. A small green thing persisting in a room full of decisions about the future, keeping itself alive without asking anyone to pay attention. You carry the pamphlets home in your bag. You don't open them until after dinner. The form needs a parent's signature by Friday. The future waits, patient and enormous, just past the edge of what you currently know. The bell rings at the end of the last period and the building empties in a way that feels different from every other dismissal during the day, more complete, more final. Students pour out the front and side doors and scatter in half a dozen directions, and the particular character of the afternoon that follows depends entirely on who you are and what you have agreed to do with your time between 3 o'clock and dinner. For the athletes, it means locker rooms and practice fields and the particular satisfaction of a body being asked to work. For the students in drama and chorus and the school newspaper, it means staying inside while the building grows quieter around you. Rooms that felt crowded an hour ago now belonging almost entirely to a small group of people who chose to be here. For everyone else, it means outside. The afternoon air in the first weeks of school carries the particular quality of early September. Warm, but with something slightly different in it than the summer air was. A crispness at the edges that does not belong to July. A reminder that the season is in the middle of changing and has not quite committed to its new direction. You walk down the front steps and the concrete radiates the heat it has been collecting since morning, and the sound of the building behind you diminishes with each block, and by the time you're 2 streets away it is gone entirely, and the afternoon belongs to itself. Some students go home directly, following the same route they have walked since freshman year, past the same yards and the same corner stores and the same landmarks that make the walk familiar enough to be completed without conscious attention, which means it can be completed while thinking about something else entirely. These are often the most productive 20 minutes of the day, the walk home, when the mind is released from the obligation of being present in a classroom and moves instead through the events of the day at its own pace, replaying certain moments, revising certain responses, filing things away in the quiet and unobserved way the mind does when no one is asking it to perform. Other students stop. The drugstore near the school has a lunch counter that serves Coca-Cola and grilled cheese, and the kind of conversation that is different in quality from the conversation of the school day, looser, less supervised, conducted at a volume that would not be tolerated in any room of the building they just left. The stools at the counter fill up by 3:15 and stay full until 4:30, and the conversations that happen there are the social continuation of the school day, the same relationships and the same negotiations, but conducted now without the institutional structure that governs them during hours. The afternoon has a texture that the morning does not, slower and more permissive, this specific quality of time that belongs to young people in the hours between the end of obligation and the beginning of dinner. It is the time in which nothing is required, which means it is also the time in which everything feels most possible, when the version of yourself that you are at school gives way briefly to some less defined and more private version, the one that reads things not on any syllabus and thinks about questions that no class has posed and exists in the world of the neighbourhood and the afternoon rather than the world of the building and the bell. The light changes as the weeks go on. By October, the afternoon is shorter, and the light that comes through the drugstore window at 4 o'clock is lower and more golden, and the walk home in November is a walk into early darkness that takes some adjustment each year. By December, the after-school hours have contracted to almost nothing. The brief window between the building and dinner closing earlier each day, and the long loose afternoons of September feel, in retrospect, like a different season entirely, which they were. You will not remember the specific conversations. You will not remember most of what was said at the lunch counter, or on the walk home, or in the backyard of whoever's house the afternoon ended at. What you will remember is the quality of the time itself, the specific freedom of those hours, the way the afternoon felt like yours in a way that no other part of the day quite did. That feeling of ownership, brief and particular and unrepeatable, is one of the things that gets lost in the accounting of what school was. The hours between 3 and dinner, the walk home, the counter stool, the afternoon that belonged entirely to you before the evening asked you to come inside. The gymnasium has been transformed, or something near it. The bleachers are folded back against the wall. Crepe paper in the school colours has been strung from the ceiling by the junior class committee, and the effect is festive in the way of something that has taken considerable effort and resulted in something slightly less than what was imagined. A record player has been set up near the far wall, and someone has been designated to manage it, a responsibility that carries with it a mild social authority for the evening. The lights are lower than usual, not dark exactly, but dim enough to create a version of the gymnasium that is distinct from the one you inhabit every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 in the morning. The preparation for a school dance begins days before the dance itself, in the more private and more consuming space of anticipation. Girls plan what they will wear with the seriousness of people preparing for something consequential, because it is consequential, the outfit understood as a statement whose reception will be registered and remembered. Boys plan less overtly, but plan nonetheless, running through calculations that they would not describe as planning, but that amount to the same thing. Who will be there? Who they might speak to? Whether the evening will confirm or revise the social standing they occupy during ordinary school hours. The gymnasium fills slowly at first, students arriving in clusters and positioning themselves along the walls with a practiced casualness of people who are trying not to appear to be waiting. The music is audible from the hallway before you enter, a record playing at a volume that is loud enough to establish the mood, but not so loud as to prevent conversation, a balance the student DJ will adjust imperfectly throughout the evening. The floor is mostly empty in the first half hour, occupied by the students who either care least about appearances or care most about dancing, both of whom have resolved the question of whether it is acceptable to dance before anyone else has and moved on. The chaperones stand near the refreshment table, which holds punch and small cookies arranged on a paper tablecloth, and they occupy the role assigned to them with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The younger teachers move through the evening with a kind of alert goodwill, occasionally joining conversations genuinely present. The older ones maintain a perimeter and watch with the expression of people who have chaperoned enough school dances to understand exactly what will and will not happen, and have arrived at a position of professional equanimity about both. Slow songs are announced by a change in tempo and a change in the room. The floor empties of the students who are not prepared for what a slow song requires and fills, gradually, with the ones who are or who have decided this particular song is the occasion to become prepared. Partners are chosen or negotiated or arrived at through a sequence of glances and small movements that is conducted with an indirectness that the directness of the question it is circling would make impossible. You stand near someone, the song is playing, the evening does the rest. The walk home afterward, or the ride, carries a different quality than any other transit the school year contains. Something happened tonight, not dramatically, not in any way that would be legible to someone who was not there, but something, a conversation that went a certain direction, a dance that meant something or did not, a moment at the punch table that you will think about tomorrow and again the day after. The crepe paper is still hanging in the gymnasium. The record player has been put away. The bleachers will be pulled back out on Monday morning for gym class. But tonight was its own country, briefly inhabited, already becoming memory on the walk home through the autumn dark. There are events in the life of a 1960s American high school that exist outside the building's walls but still belong entirely to the institution. And the Friday night football game is the clearest example, a gathering that draws students and parents and teachers and neighbours in a combination that does not occur at any other point in the year. The field is lit by banks of lights mounted on tall poles, and the light they cast is a particular shade of white that makes everything beneath it look slightly more vivid than it does in daylight. The bleachers fill from the middle outward, and by the time the teams take the field, the sound is something you feel as much as hear, the compressed energy of several hundred people who have agreed to care about the same thing at the same time. The smell of the Friday night game is different from any smell inside the building. A combination of cut grass and cold air and the particular warmth of a crowd, pressed together on wooden bleachers. Underneath it, the smell of hot dogs from the concession stand that has been operating since 6 o'clock. A small booth under the home bleachers run by the Booster Club and staffed by parents who have been doing this exact thing every Friday night in October for years. The hot dogs come wrapped in waxed paper and cost a dime, and they taste in the cold October air under the field lights better than they have any right to taste, which is something that happens with food eaten at the right moment in the right place. You find a seat in the section where students sit, which is understood without being marked, and the bleachers are cold through your coat, the metal retaining the chill of the afternoon in a way that wood does not. The people around you are people you see every day in the building, but they are different here, looser, louder, freed from the behavioural constraints of the classroom and the corridor. The girl who sits quietly in the back row of your English class is standing and yelling at the field with a conviction that the school day has never once suggested she possessed. The boy from your homeroom who barely speaks is laughing with his whole body at something his friend said. The game reveals people. The band plays from the opposite end of the bleachers, and the sound of it carries across the field with the particular quality of music played outdoors, slightly diffuse, slightly warmer than it sounds in an enclosed space, the brass catching the light from the field lamps. The halftime show moves the band onto the field, and the bleachers settle into a different kind of attention, watching the formations assemble and dissolve, the drums keeping time with a steadiness that is its own form of authority. The game itself is absorbed partly and not entirely. You watch the plays, and you understand roughly what is happening, and you respond when the crowd responds, rising when someone rises, falling quiet when the play goes wrong, feeling the collective disappointment or the collective release of a good run in the physical way that being part of a crowd produces it. But the game is also background to the evening, context for what is really happening in the bleachers, which is the social life of the school conducted outside its usual geography, freer and more vivid for the cold air and the lights and the shared permission to be loud. The drive or walk home afterward carries the residual warmth of the crowd, the specific feeling of having been part of something collective, something that happened all at once to everyone present. The field lights will be off by 10. The bleachers will be empty. The grass will carry the marks of the game until the groundskeeper works it over on Saturday morning. But Friday night held something that the school building on its best ordinary day could not quite produce. The feeling of a whole community gathered in one place for one purpose, held together briefly by something as simple and as sufficient as a game. Outside of school, in the hours that belonged to no one but themselves, students in the early 1960s inhabited a cultural landscape that was in the middle of one of its largest shifts in memory. The music had changed recently, or was in the process of changing, and the records that were played on portable turntables, in bedrooms and at parties, and through the tinny speaker of a transistor radio, carried something new in them, an energy and a directness that felt different from what had come before. The television in the living room was still a shared family object, watched in the evening after dinner, but the content it offered had begun to include things aimed specifically at young people, variety programs and teen dramas that acknowledged, however tentatively, that the audience existed. The record collection of a teenager in 1962 is a document of a cultural moment in transition. On one side of the shelf, the music that arrived from the previous decade, the smooth, orchestrated pop that parents recognized and approved of, the voices that belonged to a settled and comfortable version of American life. On the other side, something newer and less settled, rock and roll, that had been in the air since the mid-50s and had not gone away, that had in fact deepened and sharpened and become more itself, and the new arrivals from the early part of the decade that pointed towards something not yet fully visible, sounds arriving from directions that had not been listened to before. You carried a transistor radio the size of a paperback book in your coat pocket, and the signal it received was often imperfect, laced with static, that required the tuning dial to be adjusted every few blocks when you walked. But the imperfection was part of it, part of the pleasure of a technology that was personal in a way the living room television was not, that belonged to you rather than to the household. The disc jockeys who spoke between songs had voices and personalities that were themselves part of the listening, fast-talking and enthusiastic and faintly conspiratorial. Speaking to an audience they understood was young and was waiting for something. At the library and in the paperback rack at the drugstore, the reading available to a curious teenager ranged wider than the school curriculum allowed. Paperback novels cost 35 cents and fit in a coat pocket, and could be read in an afternoon if the afternoon was long enough. Some of them were adventure stories, some were mysteries, some were things that belonged to categories the school library would not have shelved in the young adult section if it had a young adult section, which it did not quite yet. The reading you did on your own, the reading that no one assigned and no one graded, was often the reading that stayed with you longest. Not because it was better necessarily, but because you chose it freely and it cost you something to obtain it, and it belonged entirely to you. The movies were a separate world and a shared one, experienced in the dark of a theatre with whoever you went with, the screen large enough to fill your whole field of vision, the sound loud enough to feel physical. The films of the early 1960s were still largely the product of the studio system that had built Hollywood in the previous decades. But something was beginning to shift there too. A restlessness in the storytelling, a willingness to show things that an earlier era would have smoothed over, characters whose unhappiness was not resolved in the final reel in the way the formula required. You absorbed all of this without a framework for understanding what you were absorbing. The music and the films and the books and the radio were simply the texture of the present, the air of the cultural moment you happened to be young in. It was only later, looking back, that the shape of it became visible. The particular combination of things ending and things beginning, of a settled world and an unsettled one occupying the same decade simultaneously. Being 16 in 1962 meant living inside that transition without knowing it was a transition, which is the only way anyone ever lives inside the most significant moments of their time. You were simply listening to what was on, reading what was available, watching what was playing. It just happened to be one of the most consequential cultural shifts in a century. In the fall of 1963, something is different. It may not be spoken about directly in most classrooms. The curriculum does not address it. Not yet, not in most schools, not in most towns. But it is present anyway, in the way that large things are present even when they are not named, in the quality of certain silences, in the conversations that happen or conspicuously do not happen, in the expressions of teachers who are trying to decide whether what is happening in the country is their responsibility to address or someone else's. The students are watching the news. They are watching it with their parents in the evenings, and what they see is a country in the process of being asked a question it has been avoiding for a very long time. The television has been showing them images that are not easy to sit with. Fire hoses and dogs in Birmingham, the March on Washington in August, 250,000 people gathered on the Mall, a speech whose phrases have already begun to move through the culture with the speed of something that has found its moment. These are not distant events, not history in the sense that the textbook history is history, settled and completed and safe to examine. They are happening now, this week, and the newspaper is on the kitchen table, and the radio news comes on at the top of every hour, and the people involved are alive, and the outcome is not determined. In a school where most of the students are white, the civil rights movement exists as news, as something happening elsewhere, in Birmingham and Jackson and Washington, not here. But here is not as separate from there as the hallways of the school might make it appear. Here has its own arrangements, its own distributions of comfort and discomfort along lines that the school does not discuss. And the events on the television are not unrelated to those arrangements, even if the connection is not spoken. There are teachers who address it directly, who bring the newspaper into the classroom and say this is what is happening, and it is our subject today, whether it is on the syllabus or not. These teachers are not always appreciated by everyone in the building for doing so. The principal receives phone calls from parents who believe the classroom is not the appropriate place for this conversation, who believe the appropriate place is somewhere else, a somewhere else that is never quite specified. The teacher makes a judgment about what the moment requires and proceeds, and the students sit with the discomfort or the engagement or the confusion that the conversation produces and carry it out into the hallway when the bell rings. Other teachers say nothing and teach the scheduled lesson and are aware, in some private way, of the gap between what they're teaching and what is in the air outside the windows, and they manage that gap through silence, which is also a position which also communicates something to the students who are watching to see what the adults around them will do. In November, the president is shot in Dallas and the school day stops entirely, interrupted by the sound of the principal's voice over the intercom speaking words that transform the afternoon into something no one has a name for yet. Teachers stand at the front of their classrooms with expressions their students have never seen on them before. Human expressions, the expressions of people who have just learned something the world cannot take back. Some cry, some do not. All of them are suddenly not teachers in the way they were this morning, but simply people, standing in rooms full of other people, trying to find somewhere to put what they are feeling. The building does not recover its ordinary quality for days. The hallways are quieter. The cafeteria is quieter. The normal social machinery of the school runs, but runs differently, at a lower register, as if everyone has agreed without speaking that the usual volume is not appropriate for the current weather. It is the first time, for many students, that the world outside the building has entered it so completely, so undeniably, that the building's ordinary routines could not contain it. It will not be the last. The newspaper office is a small room near the back of the building with 2 typewriters and a hand-cranked mimeograph machine, and a bulletin board covered in clippings and layout sketches and a schedule that is always slightly behind. The students who work here have chosen to be here in a specific way that feels different from joining the track team or the student council, a choice that says something about how they want to be seen and what they think matters. The faculty advisor sits at a desk in the corner and offers guidance without quite taking over, a balance that requires ongoing negotiation from both sides. The paper comes out every 2 weeks, 4 pages, printed on the mimeograph in ink that smells of something between ammonia and possibility. The typewriters are manual, and the sound of them when 2 people are working simultaneously fills the small room with a percussive energy that belongs to no other room in the building. The keys require pressure, real pressure, not the light touch of a later technology, and the rhythm of the typing is the rhythm of thought being committed to paper with a degree of physical effort that slows you down just enough to consider what you are saying. Mistakes are corrected with white correction fluid that dries slowly and smells strongly, and leaves a raised patch on the page that you can feel with your fingertip. The page that comes out of the typewriter is a finished object, provisional but physical, and the act of producing it feels to the students who do it here like something that matters. The question of what to cover is perpetually under debate. The safe choices are obvious and occupy most of the paper's 4 pages: sports results, club announcements, a teacher profile, the senior spotlight. These are the stories that produce no conflict and no phone calls to the principal, and no conversations about what the newspaper is and is not supposed to do. They fill the space and satisfy the expectation and disappear from memory within a week of publication. The more interesting conversations happen around the edges of the safe choices. A student wants to write about the conditions in the cafeteria. Another wants to profile the custodial staff, a choice the faculty advisor receives with careful neutrality that takes 2 weeks to resolve itself into permission. Someone pitches a story about the dress code and the question of who it serves, a pitch that does not make it through the faculty advisor's review in its original form, but is published in a modified version that retains enough of its point to mean something to the students who read it. The faculty advisor is navigating a real tension between the educational value of genuine journalism, of students learning to form and defend and publish opinions, and the institutional reality of a school that employs her and serves a community with a range of views about what a high school newspaper is for. She wants the students to learn to ask real questions. She also has a job. These 2 things are not always in conflict, but when they are, the negotiation is conducted quietly and carefully, and the students who are paying attention learn from the negotiation itself something about how institutions and individuals manage the gap between what is possible and what is permitted. The mimeograph machine produces copies that are slightly imperfect, the ink sometimes uneven, the pages carrying a faint chemical smell that clings to them for a day and then fades. The papers are distributed on the morning of publication, stacked on a table near the front entrance, and the students who walk past them pick one up or do not, and the ones who pick them up read them or do not, and most of the stories disappear unremembered into the archive of the school year. But occasionally a piece lands in a way that produces a response, a conversation in the cafeteria, a mention by a teacher in class, a letter to the editor in the next issue. And in those moments, the students in the small back room with the 2 typewriters understand something that no other activity in the school has taught them with quite the same directness. That words, put in the right order and sent into the world, do something. That having an opinion and being willing to put your name on it is not a small thing. The mimeograph smell fades, the paper yellows, but the lesson remains. Not everyone in a 1960s American high school is on the path toward college, and the building has been designed to accommodate that fact with a degree of directness that a later era would find uncomfortable. The school divides its students into tracks, not always formally, not always with explicit labels, but the division is real and everyone within it understands it. At one end of the corridor, students bound for university are reading Shakespeare and working through trigonometry. At the other end, in rooms that smell of sawdust and motor oil and the particular warmth of an oven that has been running since 8 in the morning, other students are learning to build things and fix things and prepare things, skills that their parents used every day and that the school has decided are worth teaching. The shop room is one of the most sensory rooms in the building, a room where what you're doing is visible and audible and physical in ways that no other classroom allows. Wood shavings curl onto the floor around the workbenches. The smell of sawdust is sharp and clean, and has a particular quality in warm air that makes it almost sweet. The tools hang on pegboards along the wall, each outlined in painted silhouette so that their absence is immediately visible, an organisational system that communicates the seriousness with which the room treats its equipment. The shop teacher moves through the space with the ease of someone who has spent his working life in rooms like this, pausing at a workbench to adjust a grip or redirect a cut, speaking in the brief specific language of someone who teaches through demonstration as much as instruction. The students who are tracked here have often been tracked here by a combination of their academic record and a set of assumptions, sometimes spoken, more often not, about what kind of future their circumstances point toward. Some of them resent it with a quiet bitterness that never quite surfaces. Others are genuinely here because this is what they are good at, because the work of making something with your hands produces a satisfaction that no book has yet managed to replicate for them. The shop teacher knows the difference and addresses each accordingly, with the particular patience of a teacher who has learned that motivation is not one thing and cannot be produced by a single approach. The home economics room is warm in a domestic way, the warmth of an oven that has been used recently, of fabric and starch and the faint floral of a dish soap. Girls learn to cook from recipes that assume a future in which cooking is their primary daily occupation, and they learn to sew from patterns that produce garments they will actually wear, and they learn to manage a household budget with worksheets that take for granted a set of domestic arrangements they have not yet had occasion to question. The teacher moves between the sewing machines and the kitchen stations with the efficiency of someone managing multiple simultaneous processes, checking the seam allowance here, tasting the sauce there, offering corrections in a voice that is practical without being unkind. There is value in what is being taught in both rooms, real and practical value, and the students who learn it well carry it forward into lives that use it every day. The question that the later era will ask, the question of whether the tracking itself was fair, of whether the assumptions built into it served every student equally, is not a question the school is asking in 1962. It is asking only whether the students in each track are learning what they have been sent there to learn. most of them are. The things being built in the shop room are real things. Chairs and shelves and small tables that go home in the back of someone's car at the end of the semester and get used. The things being cooked in the home economics room are real food, eaten by real people at real tables. That concreteness, that undeniable physicality of work completed and things made, is not nothing. It is for some students the closest thing the school day offers to genuine satisfaction. The sawdust settles on the floor. The oven cools at the end of the period. The work was real while it was happening. The teachers of a 1960s American high school are not simply the inhabitants of classrooms, they are the inhabitants of a building, a community, a professional world with its own interior life that most students never glimpse and rarely think about. They arrive before you do and leave after you, and in between they occupy a teacher's lounge that is, in most schools, a small room with a coffee percolator and several chairs that have seen better decades. A space where the professional performance required of the classroom can briefly be set down. They smoke, many of them, and the lounge carries the evidence of it, a faint haze that makes the room feel more like a private club than a faculty break room. The coffee percolator runs continuously from 7 in the morning until the last teacher leaves in the afternoon, and the coffee it produces has been brewing long enough by midday that it has achieved a concentration and a bitterness that functions less as a beverage than as a commitment. The teachers who drink it at 3 in the afternoon do so with the particular expression of people who have moved past the point where they are drinking coffee for pleasure and are drinking it because they have been drinking it at this hour for 15 years and the body has come to expect it. The conversations that happen in the lounge are the most unguarded conversations of the school day, freed from the presence of students and the performance of authority. Teachers complain here, specifically and without guilt, about the student who has not turned in an assignment in 6 weeks, about the parent who called the principal rather than the teacher when she disagreed with a grade, about the new policy from the administration that adds one more form to a process that was already entirely sufficient with the previous number of forms. They also laugh here, sometimes loudly, and the laughter is different from the controlled warmth of a teacher laughing in a classroom, more genuine, less considered. They talk about their lives outside the building with a specificity that would surprise the students who imagine them as people who exist only within its walls. There is a teacher who is building an addition to his house on weekends and who is tracking the project's progress through a series of setbacks that have become a running narrative in the lounge. There is a teacher who is taking night classes toward a master's degree and who arrives on Tuesday mornings slightly more tired than on other mornings. There is a teacher who's been at this school for 22 years and who knows where everybody is buried institutionally speaking and who shares this information in the lounge with the generosity of someone who has been here long enough to know that the new people need the map. The professional difficulties are real, and they are discussed with honesty here that they cannot be discussed with elsewhere. Teaching in 1962 is a profession that is respected publicly and compensated modestly, a combination that produces in many of its practitioners a relationship to the work that is more complicated than simple dedication or simple resentment. They have chosen it, and they continue to choose it, and they carry the weight of that choice with them into this room and set it down briefly over burnt coffee and cigarette smoke and the kind of frank conversation that the classroom never permits. They grade papers at home, at kitchen tables after dinner, while their own children are doing homework in the next room. They prepare lessons on Sunday afternoons with the textbooks open beside them and a notepad for the sequence of the class, planning the 45 minutes that will look, when it arrives, like it required no planning at all. They carry the building home with them in a way that the building never entirely acknowledges and that the students never see. What the teachers do when no one is watching is mostly continue to teach. In the extended sense of the word, the preparation, and the reflection and the quiet ongoing effort of people who have accepted that the work does not end when the bell rings. The lounge empties at the end of the day. The percolator is switched off. The chairs are left in the positions the last occupants left them. Tomorrow it begins again from the beginning, the same way it always does. By the last weeks of the school year, something has shifted in the building in a way that everyone acknowledges without anyone quite naming. The academic urgency of September and October is long gone. The serious middle months, November through March, when the work was real and the expectations were held firmly in place, those are behind you now. May is a different kind of time, warm and slow and full of the particular restlessness of people who can see the end of something and have begun, involuntarily, to release their grip on the present. The windows are open, and the smell that comes through them is cut grass and warming asphalt. The smell of somewhere that is not here. The teacher is still teaching. This is worth noting because it would be easy to assume otherwise, to imagine that the last weeks of school are a kind of mutual agreement to stop pretending. But the teacher is still at the board, still moving through the material, still calling on students and expecting responses and marking things in the grade book that will matter in the final accounting of the year. The institution has not softened its requirements because the weather has changed. The requirements are what they always were. It is the students who have softened, subtly but undeniably, in a way that the teachers see and the students do not recognize in themselves, because it is the condition they are inside. The pencils move more slowly across the notebook paper. The eyes travel to the windows more frequently and return to the front of the room a half-second later than they did in February. The quality of attention is still present, but it is thinner, stretched across a larger volume of afternoon, diluted by the awareness of everything that exists outside the window, and is becoming more available by the day. The classroom in the late May has a specific quality of light that earlier months do not produce. The sun is high and direct by mid-morning, and the light that comes through the windows is not the low, amber light of October, but a flatter, brighter light that makes the room feel slightly overexposed. The green walls too green, the linoleum too shiny. The students sitting in the sunside rows have pushed their desks slightly leftward over the course of the hour, a gradual collective migration that the teacher has stopped correcting because it will happen again tomorrow regardless. There is a particular cruelty to the school calendar that places final exams in June, requiring sustained academic effort at precisely the moment when the body and the mind have concluded that effort of that kind belongs to a season that has ended. The students who are disciplined enough to study in the evenings of late May and early June are studying against a powerful counter-argument made by the temperature and the extended light and the sound of the neighbourhood outside the window, and their discipline deserves more credit than it typically receives. The last day of school has a quality that is impossible to reproduce in memory, because memory flattens it into a symbol. The last day, the end of the year, summer beginning, and the symbol is too large and too clean to hold the actual texture of the experience, which was smaller and stranger and more mixed. There is relief, and there is something that is not quite sadness but is adjacent to it, the particular feeling of a structure ending, of something you complained about for 9 months suddenly becoming something you're walking away from and will not be inside again until September. Changed. You carry out of the building on the last afternoon the same books and notebooks you carried in on the first morning of September, heavier now with the accumulation of the year's work, and you walk out the front door into the June afternoon, and the door closes behind you with the same sound it makes every day, unremarkable, ordinary, the sound of a building that does not mark occasions. The school year is over, the building remains. The summer is everywhere at once, immediate and enormous, the smell of it rising from the warm sidewalk in waves, You have 9 weeks before the door opens again and the whole machinery resumes. 9 weeks feels, on the last afternoon of May, like the rest of your life. The student council meets every Thursday in a room adjacent to the principal's office, which is either a sign of the school's confidence in its student government or a reminder of where actual authority resides. The students who sit on the council have been elected by their classmates in a process that is somewhat more complicated than it appears, a competition shaped as much by social standing as by any formal campaign, and they arrive at each meeting with the particular energy of people who have been given responsibility but not quite power. They discuss the spring dance and the condition of the water fountains, and whether the vending machines in the cafeteria should be allowed to sell grape soda, and their recommendations are received by the administration with the diplomatic attention paid to something that is being listened to but not necessarily heard. The room they meet in has a long table and more chairs than are needed, and the student council members arrange themselves around it with a seriousness that would be recognizable to anyone who's ever sat in a meeting that mattered less than its participants were willing to admit. The president calls the meeting to order. The secretary reads the minutes from the previous meeting. The treasurer reports that the activities fund has the same amount in it that it had 2 weeks ago because nothing has been approved for spending yet. These are the rituals of governance performed at a reduced scale, and the students who perform them are learning something real about how institutions work, even if what they are learning is not precisely what they believe they are learning. The faculty advisor sits at the end of the table and does not speak for long stretches of the meeting, which is its own form of guidance. The silence communicates that the students are expected to manage the conversation themselves, to arrive at conclusions through their own process, and the students who understand this feel the weight of it as genuine responsibility. Those who do not understand it feel it as permission to argue longer about the grape soda. The proposals that emerge from the student council are real proposals, written up and submitted to the administration through the appropriate channels, and the administration receives them with a courtesy that is genuine in its form and selective in its effect. Some proposals are approved quickly. The ones that ask for nothing that costs money, or changes anything that the administration would have preferred to leave unchanged. Others are approved in modified form, which is to say they are returned with the substance of the request removed and the appearance of responsiveness preserved. A few simply wait, sitting in an administrative inbox whose depth cannot be measured from the outside, until the school year ends and the question becomes moot. The students who are most affected by this process are the ones who arrived at the council with genuine intentions, who believed that the election meant something, and that the meetings would produce change that could be pointed to at the end of the year. These students are learning a lesson about institutional power that no civics class has prepared them for, a lesson about the distance between formal authority and actual authority, between the role and its limits, between the process and its outcome. It is not a comfortable lesson, and it is not taught on purpose. It is simply what happens when young people are given the form of participation without its full substance. But there are also students on the council who understand the situation more clearly, who have watched the adults around them long enough to know how decisions actually get made, and who have decided to work within the constraint rather than against it. These students learn to frame proposals in language the administration can accept, to make the request that is possible rather than the request that is ideal, to build relationships with the faculty advisor and occasionally with the principal himself in the patient, incremental way that real influence is built. They are not being cynical, they are being practical, and the distinction is important. The student council photograph appears in the yearbook every year. The members arranged around the long table in the room adjacent to the principal's office, looking serious and capable and faintly proud. The caption lists their names and their titles. The photograph does not record what was decided or whether the decisions mattered. It records only that they were here, that they sat at the table, that they participated in the form of the thing. Some of them will sit at other tables in other rooms later in their lives, tables with the decisions do carry weight, and they will recognize the form from this room, the agenda and the minutes and the treasurer's report and the careful management of the advisor at the end of the table. They will know how to behave because they learned here, in this room, at this scale, in meetings that were partly theatre and partly practice, and partly, in the ways that mattered, real. The grape soda question is eventually resolved in a manner that satisfies no one completely, which is, as the faculty advisor notes to himself on the drive home, a perfectly accurate introduction to how most things get resolved. The student council will meet again next Thursday. The minutes will be taken. The fund will remain largely intact. The work of practicing democracy at 17, imperfect and instructive and occasionally maddening, will continue. It always does. On a November afternoon in 1963, a teacher stops in the middle of a lesson. She does not announce what she's doing or explain why. She walks to the intercom panel on the wall and listens, and the class watches her. And the quality of her listening is different from ordinary listening. More still, more careful. The way a person listens when they are trying to determine whether what they are hearing is actually what they think it is. Then she turns back to the room, and the expression on her face is something that most of the students have never seen on a teacher before. Not distress exactly, not quite grief, but something in between, a human expression breaking through the professional one. And in that moment the classroom becomes a different kind of place than it was a minute ago. The students in the room are not yet sure what has happened. They read the teacher's face for information and find there only that something has changed, that the ordinary calibration of the school day has been interrupted by something from outside it, something that the teacher is processing in real time, without the usual preparation that her profession gives her for everything she brings into this room. She has a lesson plan. She has a grade book. She has 20 years of classroom experience that tells her how most situations feel and what to do with them. She does not have anything for this. She tells them simply, in a voice that is controlled because she's making it controlled, that the president has been shot in Dallas. She tells them what she knows, which is not much, which is what came through the intercom a moment ago, fragmentary, and not yet confirmed in the way that news requires to be certain. The class is quiet in a way that is different from the quiet of a classroom waiting for instruction. It is the quiet of people who have just received information they do not know where to put. Some students begin to cry almost immediately, not from grief exactly, not yet, because grief requires an understanding of loss that has not yet settled, but from the shock of it, the rupture of the ordinary, the sudden presence of something enormous in a room designed for the ordinary and the manageable. Other students sit very still, looking at the desk surface or the window, or some middle distance that is not quite any physical place. The teacher stands at the front of the room and does not pretend to teach. She also does not pretend that she knows what to do next, and her willingness to not pretend is, for the students watching her, its own kind of instruction. The school day continues in a technical sense. The bells ring at their scheduled intervals and the hallways fill and empty in the normal pattern, and the cafeteria serves the normal lunch, and teachers remain at the fronts of their classrooms for the duration of their periods. But the day is not normal, and no one in the building believes it is. The quality of attention in every room is different, turned inward, turned towards something that the school's routines cannot contain or address. Students move through the hallways with less noise than usual, with less of the casual social energy that ordinarily makes the passing period what it is, and the reduced noise has a weight to it. a collective holding of something that has not yet resolved into any particular emotion. The teachers make individual decisions, each within the privacy of their own classroom, about whether to speak about what has happened or to proceed with the lesson. The ones who speak find that speaking is not simple, that the words available to them are inadequate to the fact of the afternoon, and that the students listening are not listening for information so much as for some sign of how to be, how to hold what they are holding, how to be 17 years old in a school building on the afternoon that this has happened. The walk home or the bus ride is quieter than usual. The neighbourhood looks the same as it looked this morning, the same houses and the same trees and the same afternoon light, and the sameness is itself strange, the world having failed to visually register what has occurred. You arrive home and the television is already on, your mother or your father having heard the news earlier in the afternoon, and the living room is organised around the screen in a way that is different from ordinary evening television, more urgent, more still. You sit down. The news anchor speaks. The afternoon that began as an ordinary Friday in November is now something else entirely. A date, a before and after, a line drawn through the calendar that everyone in the country is standing on one side of, and will stand on for the rest of their lives. The school will reopen on Monday. The lessons will resume. But something that was present in the building before that November afternoon will not be entirely present afterward. A certain quality of the ordinary, a background assumption about the steadiness of things that the day took and did not return. You will remember where you were when you heard. Everyone will. That is what it means when something happens in the world. The gymnasium has been set up for the ceremony, chairs in long rows facing a temporary stage, a podium with the school seal on it, and a banner that reads something congratulatory in the school colours. The graduating class files in wearing caps and gowns that are either new or have been borrowed from a sibling, and the combination of familiarity, this room, these people, this building you have known for 4 years, and ceremony, the robes, the arranged flowers, the parents in the bleachers, creates a feeling that is difficult to name precisely, and that most of the graduates will spend years afterward trying to describe to people who are not there. You are not done with the world you're entering. But you are, as of this morning, done with this one. The gymnasium smells different this morning, the industrial floor wax and the rubber of athletic equipment replaced by something more floral, arrangements placed at the corners of the stage by the parents' committee, white carnations and greenery that look formal and slightly out of place in a room where 2 weeks ago someone was doing rope climbs. The folding chairs are the same chairs used for every assembly, slightly uneven in their rows, the metal legs catching the morning light through the high windows, and the parents in the bleachers are dressed in their best things and holding cameras and looking at the door through which the graduates will enter, with the concentrated attention of people watching for something specific. You walk in with the other graduates and the processional music, familiar from rehearsal the day before, carries you down the aisle in a pace slightly slower than you would naturally walk, the pace of ceremony, of something being made deliberately distinct from the ordinary speed of life. The gown is heavier than it looked when you put it on this morning, and the cap requires periodic adjustment to stay level, and these small physical preoccupations anchor you in the present moment in a way that prevents the morning from becoming entirely abstract. The speeches are what graduation speeches have always been, sincere and slightly generic, drawing on metaphors of journeys and doors and beginnings that have been used at every graduation since the tradition began. The principal speaks with a warmth that he does not always display in the building during the ordinary school year, and the warmth is genuine, you can tell, but it is also addressed to a room that includes the parents in the bleachers, and not only the students in the chairs, and the dual audience shapes everything that is said, pulling it toward the representational, toward the version of the school and the class and the 4 years that will be legible to everyone present. Your name is called and you cross the stage, and the principal or the superintendent or whoever has been designated to perform this particular function extends your diploma in one hand and shakes your other hand with the practiced efficiency of someone who has 73 more names to call after yours, and you take the diploma and you turn to face the room, and the cameras flash from the bleachers, and in the second between the handshake and the turn you feel, briefly and completely, the full weight of what is happening. 4 years of mornings, 4 years of the smell of the building and the sound of the bell and the particular institution of it, the homeroom and the hallway and the cafeteria and the gymnasium, the teachers whose voices you will carry with you and the ones you will not, the friends and the rivals and the people you passed in the corridor for 4 years without ever speaking to. All of it ending in this room, in this moment, in the 30 seconds it takes to cross a stage and receive a piece of paper in a cardboard folder. The ceremony ends, and you file out, and the gymnasium empties, and the chairs will be stacked and returned to storage by the custodial staff before the end of the afternoon. The flowers will be taken home by someone on the committee. The banner will be folded and put away. Outside, in the June morning, families gather on the front steps and the lawn for photographs, and you stand among people you have known for 4 years with the diploma in your hand and the gown still on, and the cap probably slightly tilted, and the photographs that are taken this morning will show a version of you that is wholly present in a moment you are already beginning, without meaning to leave. The building stands behind you in every photograph, its brick facade unchanged by what has just occurred inside it, patient and institutional and indifferent in the way that buildings are indifferent, already preparing for September, already belonging to the students who will arrive then, rather than the ones departing now. You are here, now you are leaving. The building will not mark the difference, but you will carry it anyway, the whole weight of those 4 years, light and heavy at once, for longer than you currently have any way of knowing. Not everyone moves through a 1960s American high school with ease, and the institution, for all its apparent orderliness, does not accommodate its outliers particularly well. The student who reads too much and speaks too quietly, the one who dresses in a way that is slightly off, not wrong exactly, but off, a step to the left of whatever invisible standard has been established, the one who is brilliant at something the school does not value and indifferent to the things it does. These students navigate the building differently from the ones at the centre of its social architecture, finding their own routes, their own rooms, their own small communities within the larger one, and they do this with varying degrees of grace and varying degrees of cost. The building is not designed to be hostile to them. It is simply designed for someone else, for a version of a student that fits most easily into its categories, that performs adequately across its range of subjects, that participates in its social life without excess or deficiency, that presents a version of adolescence legible to the institution and to the community the institution serves. The students who fit this description move through the building with an ease so natural they do not recognize it as ease. The ones who do not fit recognize it immediately by its absence on approximately the 3rd day of 9th grade. The library is where some of them go, not only for the books but for the quality of the room, the permission it grants to be quiet and still, and inside your own thinking without anyone interpreting that stillness as a problem. The librarian, in most schools, is the adult in the building most likely to see these students clearly, to understand that their differentness is not a deficit, to make a recommendation that acknowledges the specific person rather than the general student. A book suggested at the right moment by the right person can change the entire texture of a school year, can make a building that felt inhospitable feel, at least for one period a day, navigable. The students who did not fit socially found each other through a process that was slow and imperfect, but generally reliable, the way water finds its level. A comment in English class that revealed a particular kind of mind. A book carried openly that most students would have kept in a bag. A willingness to laugh at something that the rest of the room had not noticed was funny. These small signals exchanged in the ordinary course of the school day without intention drew certain students toward one another in the gradual way that genuine compatibility assembles itself, and the small groups that formed around the margins of the social centre of the school were not lesser versions of the groups at the centre, but different ones, organised around different currencies. Not all of them had it this manageable. There were students for whom the school day was not merely socially peripheral, but actively uncomfortable, for whom the building's routines and expectations produced a daily friction that wore at something essential, whose differentness was visible enough or legible enough as differentness to attract the attention of students who treated it as an invitation. The cruelty of adolescence is not always spectacular. More often it is low-grade and atmospheric, a quality of the air in certain rooms, a pattern of small exclusions and small humiliations that individually register as nothing and collectively constitute something significant. The institution saw this imperfectly and addressed it inconsistently, because the institution was built by the same culture that produced the cruelty and shared some of its assumptions. What sustained many of these students was the knowledge, not always articulate but always present, that the building was not the world, that the 4 years of it had edges, that somewhere past the graduation ceremony and the diploma and the front steps, a larger and more various set of possibilities existed, places and communities and ways of living that had not been visible from inside the building, but that certain teachers and certain books had given enough evidence of to make waiting feel possible. Some of them found those places and recognized them immediately, the way you recognize something you knew existed before you found it. The college where the thing they were interested in was taken seriously. The city where the way they moved through the world was unremarkable. The vocation that asked of them exactly what they had in abundance. Others carried the weight of those years longer than the years deserved, let the building's assessment of them settle more deeply than it should have, needed more time and more distance to understand that what the school had measured was not the whole of what they were. Both of these are true at once. The building was limited, the students were not. That gap between what the institution could see and what the person actually contained is one of the permanent and instructive tensions of this particular kind of place and this particular kind of time. They were here, quietly, at the edges, finding their way, and many of them in the long run found it. So tonight, as you drift back out of those long linoleum corridors and those chalk-dusted classrooms and the particular smell of a building that held an entire world inside it, take a moment to sit with what you've just walked through. The bell that rang and released everything at once, the library and its patient quiet, the homeroom teacher calling the roll in a voice that was neither warm nor cold but simply present, steady, there every morning without fail, the cafeteria and the gymnasium and the guidance counsellor's office with its plant that was doing its best. All of it ordinary, all of it, in its own quiet way, extraordinary. The people who lived this era did not know they were living in something that would one day be remembered with such tenderness. They were simply going to school, carrying their books down a hallway, choosing a seat at a lunch table, walking home in the October afternoon with their coat open because it was not quite cold enough to button. They were becoming themselves, slowly and imperfectly, inside a building that asked things of them and held them to those things, and they rose to meet it more often than they knew. There is something worth carrying forward from all of it. Not nostalgia exactly, but attention. The willingness to be present inside an ordinary moment, to notice the light through a tall window, to sit somewhere quietly and let the day settle around you before moving on to the next thing. History is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a hallway and a bell and a teacher who remembered your name. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Rest now. You have walked a long way through a good and gentle world tonight. Let it carry you quietly towards sleep.